be very careful. The slightest vibration will set it off. I'll have to use my gentlest bite.
Uh-oh.
I believe may have bitten down just a teensy weensy too hard.
Now, I can't be quite sure, but this episode almost gives me the feeling that Sky-Byte was not originally meant to be a series regular. It almost actually appears that he's been killed off, actually, in this scene here, and I wonder if that actually may have sort of been the original intention. Although, Robots in Disguise, again, Takara makes its shows for little kids, never kills off anyone. But the way his character is handled, so much like an outsider, sort of freelancer, one could almost think that maybe he was at least meant to be blown off into space somewhere and possibly not seen again. Or maybe he could have been a recurring character. If that was the case, the developers of Car Robots changed their mind, because he does become a series regular from this point.
Sky-Byte must have shaken a bolt loose in that explosion. Now he's reading books.
What for?
He says once we understand humans, we can trick him into giving us their energy.
What sort of nonsense is this? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times? Best or worst, make up your mind!
Does Sky-Byte really think he's gonna learn how to understand humans by reading that stuff?
To be or not to be, this guy can't make up his mind either.
It's not gonna work.
Of course not. Humans are all crazy.
So as you can see, Sky-Byte survived with minor injuries, a single cast for his normal arm and a couple of band-aids. Now, I will give Robots in Disguise credit for this, which I did not realize when I first watched this series, but upon rewatching it, is it actually does a fair bit of foreshadowing. Robots in Disguise is actually one of the best, ironically, one of the best Transformers series for foreshadowing. Sky-Byte's box describes him as a sort of poet warrior, which actually fits with the sort of romanticized viewpoint Sky-Byte has of himself. And he will, in fact, later on in the series, spout poetry, specifically in the form of haikus. Get Japanese-made show. This is apparently where he gets it from. He starts reading human literature here in an attempt to understand humans. Why he's trying to understand humans, though, this series doesn't even really have him interact with humans here. And humans are not, at least as far as Sky-Byte knows, the reason his plans were foiled. It was the Autobots. And not due to the Autobots' knowledge of humans. So this kind of does come out of nowhere. And like I said, I think its only purpose is simply to, at least in the American version, is to foreshadow Sky-Byte's eventual dip into poetry. Although, while he does do it, it's actually relatively rare. Probably for the best. Now, like with last time, there are a couple of differences between the Car Robots episode and the Robots in Disguise episode from the Japanese and American versions. Mostly as an attempt on the American side to kind of clean up the plot, try to make it at least slightly less ridiculous, a little bit more coherent. Again, remember, Takara makes their shows for little children, Hasbro makes them for teens and young adults. Minor differences include when Koji meets up with Optimus Prime in the beginning of the episode, Car Robots has Koji calling Fire Convoy, whereas Robots in Disguise has Optimus calling Koji. Now, supposedly, Car Robots is set in Tokyo, whereas Robots in Disguise is supposedly set in Metro City. You can clearly see the Golden Gate Bridge right before the Predacon base, which clearly puts this up in San Francisco. The radio tower is supposedly supposed to be Tokyo Tower. If you've never heard about it, don't worry about it. It's semi-famous if you live in Japan, but not as well known as, say, Big Ben or the Statue of Liberty or the Pyramids of Giza. Most likely, this is coincidence, though. For one thing, the size is wrong. Tokyo Tower is actually 1,093 about feet tall, whereas the radio tower of the show is only about 500 feet. Clearly not meant to be the same building. Another difference, again harkening back to the first episode, while Robots in Disguise implies that X-Brawn is climbing the radio tower to get a better view of the city, Car Robots implies that he's actually just goofing off like Sideburn was chasing a red sports car. Again, the middle brother Prowl is the only one to actually stick to the mission. In Car Robots, the Three Stooges are actually confused as to why humans would even need such a bomb. Again, this is sort of neat because it has them viewing humans as mysterious and alien, which to the Predacons they would be. In Robots in Disguise, of course, instead they're more concerned about the bomb going off prematurely. In Car Robots, Sky-Byte also doesn't recognize Prowl and Sideburn or Autobots until the two of them transform. Again, implying his sort of freelancer, he's just popped up out of nowhere kind of status. However, in Robots in Disguise, he's aware of who they are. A completely added scene, recycling some of the footage and combining them, has Prowl come up with the idea to take the bomb to the highest structure. Car Robots, X-Brawn actually comes up with this idea on his own. Now, the ending scene we discussed just a minute ago is also different in Car Robots. Rather than observing that Sky-Byte is reading books, the Predacons actually imply in Car Robots that he does this frequently, and they're actually talking more about how they are impressed that he survived such an explosion. Whereas Robots in Disguise, they don't treat his survival as anything particularly miraculous, and treat it as if he's read the books for the first time. Again, kind of foreshadowing his future poetry references. Now it's time to address the elephant in the room. For many American audiences, they never saw this episode. It did get released in other Western countries, but this episode actually aired, or was supposed to air, during the morning of 9/11. Yes, that 9/11. And indeed, when I originally watched this series, when it was aired, I never saw this episode. It wasn't until I watched the reruns. Because they spent all day, of course, running the footages of the terrorist attack that happened. So I actually never got a proper introduction to Sky-Byte because of that. And the character was even more random to me when he just showed up out of nowhere in episode 3. And in a command-like position. While Megatron specifically states that Sky-Byte is in command of this mission, he's pretty much treated as Megatron's second in command of the Predacons. And indeed, in the show, he is the only other Predacon introduced. That's right, there are only 5 of them. Now, as I said before, maybe there are more elsewhere, and there's only 5 on Earth, but it's a very small number of them. Still, I wanted to make sure I addressed this issue, because I'm sure someone in the comments will mention that they've never seen this episode or mention the terrorist attack on 9/11. Indeed, if I can wax philosophical for a moment, why I turned on the TV to watch Robots in Disguise is actually how I found out about the terrorist attack, and I spent all day afterwards watching the news network, and I actually was there to see the towers fall. Even it's one of those things. People say that those who lived through World War II all know what they were doing and where they were the day Pearl Harbor was attacked. And it's the same way for those of us that lived through the 9/11 terrorist attacks. I can remember exactly where I was, who I was with, and who I called, even. Some friends of mine. It's a pretty sombering memory, even to this day. And I'm certainly grateful that such a terrorist attack like this has never occurred again. And hopefully never will on American soil or anywhere else, but unfortunately throughout the years following there have been many terrorist attacks nearly on the same scale in some cases. Although I don't think any of them, as yet anyway, has been quite as bad as this one was. If only characters like Optimus Prime and the Autobots were real, perhaps they could have prevented this. But such a thing, of course, can never be. Now, for my opinion on this episode, I really don't consider the plot to be all that much more interesting or engaging than the first one. I would really rate this episode a 3. Again, remember, 1 is the worst, 5 is average, and 10 would be excellent. So this is, while not the worst, sub-average. Arguably, it's got a little bit more action than what went on in the first episode. Does serve to introduce us to a new character in Sky-Byte, and certainly helps to flesh out Ty's character, but really, there's nothing of significance that happens here. So the only really important thing we've learned is that the Predacons need Energon, or energy to convert to Energon. Energon, if you're not aware of it, is the Transformers' fuel source. Again, remember, they're alien robots, so the energy they use is, of course, alien, and it takes the form of something called Energon, usually stored in cubes, although it doesn't necessarily have to be. Even as far back as the original series, in the 80s, they are capable of taking energy made by humans and converting it to Energon, allowing it to fuel themselves. Indeed, this plot point in its entirety actually somewhat references the original series, because that's often what the Decepticons did in the early seasons of the original 80s series. For awards, I would give this another B for boring. I would give it a Waspinator for Kelly. I will not go quite so far to penalize this episode for Sky-Byte. He is treated in this episode as at least by Predacon standards, semi-competent. And if nothing else, we are introduced to his fighting prowess. Whenever he directly engages Autobots head on, he's actually so far undefeated. He's really only taken out from a shot from Optimus Prime in his super robot mode from behind. Although, frankly, he should have seen that coming. Again, I would also award this a bow for polite combat etiquette, as the characters did go through and announce their weaponry when using it again. So that was episode 2 of Robots in Disguise, an explosive situation. Until next time, thanks for watching.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shore of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the darkness.